Tell me about your family story with Alzheimer's.
Yes. My mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's about 7 years before she passed. At first, we thought she kind of had what my grandmother before her had, because we grew up with my grandmother, and she always had Alzheimer's, so we kind of knew what was going to pass. At first, she was very similar. She was forgetful, couldn't find her keys, left the stove on, little incidences like that that we thought par for the course. And that continued for a while until she started developing other, I guess, characteristics, you might call it. She started crying a lot when she was frustrated. She normally wasn't that frustrated to start crying. She was irritable. She was restless. She was pacing, wandering, shouting. She was repeating her questions in an angry way. And we little by little started seeing a woman that had nothing to do with the positive, organized sweet pie she was much earlier. It was almost like a personality change, like someone gave her a drug to change her personality in a monster movie, you know? So we kind of thought that was Alzheimer's. We just thought going along with it, that's her form of Alzheimer's. But I have since learned that more than half the people, or around half the people, who are living with Alzheimer's really show signs of agitation in Alzheimer's dementia. And that's vastly different. They're related symptoms, I guess you would call them related but separate conditions, but they are definitely separate conditions. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make people aware of it, because we didn't know, and I could have done a much better job with my siblings caring for my mother if I had been more informed.
So that is your purpose in telling
That
the
is, I
story.
don't know if anyone's listening, but that's what I'm talking about.
Yes, absolutely. Um, why is it so important? I know that you just said that people should be more informed, but
Mhm.
where is the best place to look for this information and resources?
Well, there's a website called recognizealzheimersagitation.com, which is a mouthful. But if you go onto that website, it's chock full of useful information for caregivers in particular. What's going on, what's a typical pattern, how they can get the help they need. There's really no excuse today to go it alone. And yet, I would say that everyone I talk to who's caring for a particular parent or a grandparent is going it alone and thinking they just have to go it alone, do the best they can. That's not the way it is. Yes, there's something I learned independently caring for my mother, and it was late in coming, but once I learned it, I realized it was probably the most important piece of any information that you needed as a caregiver, and that was to walk on the person who has Alzheimer's, walk on their side of the universe the way they saw life. So when my mother would say, "Where's daddy?" I would say, "Mom, daddy died 5 years ago." Gently I'd say it, but she'd cry for 2 days over the loss of her husband. If she asked me, "I can't sleep, I can't sleep, there's a snake under my bed," I used to say, "Oh, there's no snake under your bed, Mom. Look there, there's no snake." And she'd say, "Yes, there's a snake." And I would not argue with her, but differ with her. I learned not to differ with my mother. I learned to step over to her side of the fence and look at life the way she was looking at life. If she asked me that her little baby needed a change of diapers, I would say, "Mom, you don't have a little baby, you're older now." I would just buy her a baby doll, and a baby doll that you can change diapers. I did anything that I could possibly think of to get on her side of the fence. And as a result, we actually had a nice relationship for the last 5 years of her life, because I wasn't butting up against it. I was more empathetic in a meaningful way and not embarrassing her all along the way.
Why was it so important for you to be the caregiver for your mother rather than bring in, a professional caregiver or, a more experienced caregiver at the time?
Well, you have to realize I had 9 siblings. And initially, my sister Janine cared for her. She lived right next door to her in Florida. So that was a natural thing. She quit her job and she cared for my mother all the time and organized a schedule for all the children to come and visit, the nieces to visit, the grandchildren to visit. So that was wonderful. My brother T was in charge of educating us. He learned everything about Alzheimer's, and he shared the best of what he learned. That was his job. I was able to pay for a lot more than the other siblings, so that was my job. Everybody's job was to visit my mother. So we had a really tight unit that was able to provide her what she wanted. but it was still hard. You know, it sounds like an ideal situation. By far, it's an ideal situation compared to being an individual caregiver alone. But it wasn't easy for anybody. Everybody had their own issues of watching my mother change in front of them and knowing that the end was going to be an end. And so it was difficult for everybody, and everybody processed the illness very differently and the death very differently. And I learned to respect people, what they had to do. You know, I had one brother that couldn't see my mother in a bad state. It was too upsetting for him. And I didn't think badly of him. I thought, well, that's the way he's processing it, you know? We all ganged together and made it as good as possible, but we were all smart enough to live in her life instead of always bringing her into ours as we did before.
Was there anything after your mother's death, in your research into Alzheimer's that you learned people experience, but your mother didn't experience, if that makes sense?
I'm sorry, once more, that others experienced that my mother didn't experience?
Yeah, that you learned kind of after her death and doing more research of what people can experience with Alzheimer's.
Probably not. You know, when you have Alzheimer's, I think the traditional pattern is the patient goes back in time. They become younger in their mind as things go. I know my mother, when she was madly in love with my father, she was 21, madly in love with my father. My brother knew to come. At that point, she was in a home. He knew to come to the home and ask her to dance because my dad was a great dancer, and he hugged her and kissed her. Kind of weird, some people might say, but he was my father. So he was able to fill that gap when she had little tiny babies. The dolls fill those gaps. Uh, I'm actually forgetting now what your question is. I think I got off on you. Did
No,
I?
that's okay.
Yeah,
No, that was a
good.
good answer. That was a good appropriate answer for it, so that's
But
good.
oh, I know what it was. I wanted to say most people with Alzheimer's experience that digression in getting younger, as even though they're getting older. And I think giving that respect is very important.
Mhm. Anything so far that we didn't touch on that you think is important to highlight?
Yeah, I think you should recognize or highlight the website because it's a phenomenal website. Recognize Alzheimer's agitation.com, because I think on that website people find the help they need. And it's so sad when people don't have information and they feel totally alone. It's such a tough journey. And I think that would bring, just having that knowledge brings comfort, and then acting on the knowledge makes the journey much, much more easier, much easier. I can't talk today.
No, absolutely. You did great. Thank you so much for sharing your family story with me. I think it's good to have a voice like yours talking about such an important issue and disease.
Thank you. I feel privileged. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.